my default is certainly to see these situations through the eyes of a woman. So my default is to believe women here. If a guy is creepy, the onus is on him. And when there are differences of opinion there, that's my bias. And I actually do think it's a bias because it blinds me to those occasions where we really are in a gray area, where there are legitimate differences of perception, where we're talking about bad flirting or misreading of social cues. And we're not talking about a kind of malignant attitude toward women, and we're certainly not talking about anything like rape. And so I think, generically, just to be on the record about all this, I think it's, the Me Too moment is long overdue with respect to shining the light on people like Harvey Weinstein, right? I mean, I think it's fantastic, and people, Harvey Weinstein himself and people like him belong in prison. I mean, we're talking about criminal conduct that was enabled by vast numbers of sycophantic people for reasons that are very difficult to understand. But there's a continuum there. What's damaging at this moment is that the Me Too movement is showing itself liable to wrap up people like Harvey Weinstein and Garrison Keillor and Aziz Ansari in the same sentence, right? As though there are no gradations between, in the Ansari case, until more information is in, it just seems like a bad and awkward date. And that is being lumped literally in the same sentence with something that is clearly rape, and then there's everything in between. So we have, if people are unwilling to make those distinctions, we've completely lost our ethical mooring, and there are people who are unwilling to make those distinctions. There are people who just want to burn it all down, and so in that respect, I think we have to be very careful and very fair and actually focus on details. The details always matter in cases like this.
And I can empathize with the people who might want to burn it all down, even if I disagree with burning it all down. My default is to, similarly, if somebody tells me something about something they experienced, and it doesn't just have to be scenarios like this, if somebody tells me they saw an angel or they had a ghost visit them, I believe that they are honestly trying to relay their perception of that experience. That does not mean that I believe that they actually saw a ghost. It does not mean that I've reached a conclusion about who was in the wrong in this particular scenario. And when we talk about human interactions when it comes to human sexuality, I'm often bad about reading the right cues. I tend to default on the side of nobody wants to sleep with me. That's my general assumption. It keeps me out of trouble, which is why there's not an article for me. But I believe people in general, and so I can hear two people tell me, hey, this was incredibly inappropriate, and the other person says, oh, well, what? This is news to me. I thought this, and I believe that they're both accurately trying to portray things, and we may not ever be able to get to the truth. And there are people who I think glibly say, well, innocent until proven guilty and tell the police. And okay, let's not be ridiculous. Virtually none of these things are ever going to be taken to law enforcement, nor is there anything law enforcement can do about them. Innocent until proven guilty, yes, that's a great standard in the court of law. But when we're going looking for a restaurant, we go to the Yelp reviews. That's the anecdotal evidence from people. And if there's a bad Yelp review, some people might not read further than, oh, it got 2 stars, we're not going there. Well, if it's the only review, what if that's, the long-lost relative who got their recipes stolen? And so we tend to look at this restaurant and say, okay, well, there's an aggregate here, and it's like 2.5 stars on average, and there's 700 reviews. So we don't even need to waste time reading those reviews. And you may be correct. That may be the right way to do it. But if you just see a handful of these, and it's, oh, the food was great, but the service was terrible. Well, if I've got more time, but I really want good food, maybe I should go there anyway. I think it's funny that we have trained people for the fastest possible responses and expect people to look at the situation and immediately go, this person's guilty, or when the truth is probably not quite that. I'll save my personal impressions on this specifics of the case. But I worry not so much about the people who are advocating for the Me Too movement. I'm a fan of, in general, of the Me Too movement, or the hashtag and what it's done. Because as I said, I can empathize with the people who are experiencing frustration. We have had a society where victims of sexual assault have been placed in a position where they are incredibly uncomfortable and unlikely to ever come forward. And that sits there and it stews, and it stews, and it stews, and then it explodes, as we've seen. And the problem with that sort of explosion is that there's potentially a lot of collateral damage. And I'm not saying who is or isn't collateral damage, but I can empathize with that frustration. And for me, once upon a time, we knew from statistical analysis that false accusations of sexual assault were incredibly unlikely because there were so many more that happened that were never reported. And now we're building a system where there are likely to be more accusations, which just by default increases the number of false accusations or questionable areas.
Yeah. Also, when you add the variable of anonymity, a lot of these accusations are anonymous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when we build a situation like that, the question is, are we doing good? Are we making a world where more people can come forward? Yes. And there's going to be some bad that comes along with that. So I'm incredibly encouraged by the fact that people are speaking up, by they're saying enough is enough. And yet I recognize that this comes with negatives as well. And I think that my frustration right now is with the people who either don't want to recognize potential negatives, or the people who say, it doesn't matter if there's negatives, you know, because we've suffered too long, we've taken too much, and now we're going to do this. And I can empathize with that frustration, and not to spin off into this, but the school shooting recently, immediately there were these people saying, oh, well, there were 17 school shootings in 2018. No, there weren't. Not by any reasonable standard is that an accurate fact. Snopes did an investigation. They came up with 7. I looked at their list of 7, and I think there's maybe 3 that qualify as what most people think of when you hear school shooting. Someone went into a school and opened fire. 1 is too many. Why would you ever have to feel the need to engage in hyperbole and exaggerate the facts when all you've done is you've provided ammunition to people like Ben Shapiro, I saw, to say, oh, the liberal left, they're lying about the statistics of shooting. And he's not completely wrong.
Yeah.
And we may see some of the same things in the Me Too movement, but I don't want to in any way, I want to do everything I can to empower victims to speak up and to change the world around them and deal with the additional damage and confusion that comes along with it.
Yeah.
I don't not pretend I have an answer.